Presenting today will be our Director of Strategy, Deepak Sharma. And as Vishal and Dr. Ansari so eloquently communicated, the RAK ICC really provides an excellent platform for Indian companies in particular, who may be looking at internationalizing during COVID-19 in particular. Many of the conversations we have with Indian clients at the moment are around issues of internationalization, whether that's expanding your business into the Gulf or the Middle East, or into Europe, North America, or other parts of Asia. Similarly, for international companies looking at India, they're often looking at most convenient ways to access the Indian market that may reduce the impact of regulation or bureaucracy, as well as tax. And I think the options presented by Dr. Ansari during his presentation will prove very interesting to many of our clients and many companies who will be looking both at India or at internationalization. With that, for the next 10 minutes or so, I'll hand over to Mr. Sharma, who, as I mentioned, is our Director of Strategy, and he'll talk you through some of the strategic guidance we're providing to leading corporates on how to navigate the current and unprecedented challenges that all of us are confronting during COVID-19. So Deepak, if you'd like to take it forward from here.
Thank you, Gihan. Thank you, RAK ICC, Vishal and Dr. Ansari for giving us great insights on RAK ICC and what Indian corporates can look forward to. My presentation would be on three things. First, I'm going to share with you a few insights on how this crisis is different and unique from previous health and economic crisis. Second, I will talk about briefly on how this crisis has blunted the traditional tools of strategy development and execution. And in that context, what business leaders and CEOs can actually do to effectively navigate to work in the COVID space and look towards the international opportunities which are becoming available both inbound and outbound. So if we go to the next slide, Gihan, please. When we look at COVID-19, on the case fatality rate, this is not as severe as it looked at the beginning. So you can clearly see it is, in many countries, it is less than 2%, for example, in India. In some countries, it might be 3% plus. But its real impact is on the economies. And this particular impact is on India's economy. And this financial year, it is projected that the hit is going to be in double digits. Now, when we are looking at that kind of impact, what it also brings, as you will see in the next slide, is at the beginning of this crisis, because this virus is very unique and it was not encountered before, there were a lot of uncertainties and ifs and buts. And this slide shows you an index on uncertainty, which is measured by a team at Stanford. And you can clearly see in the beginning of this crisis, uncertainty levels reached all-time high. Of course, now the situation has become better as we have got a lot of more information about the virus. But this clearly has implications for companies when they are working on their strategy. As Vishal also pointed out, in this era, mergers and acquisitions are one clear form of international strategy, and companies who can understand these uncertainties and can look at opportunities in these adversities will shine through this crisis and will come as winners. Now, what it means when we look at this uncertainty, when we look at the exports from India in the next slides, we can clearly see that there is a recovery, but this recovery is not consistent. So the exports started going up from April onwards, but then in August they have little bit slid again. But when companies are looking at these type of growth, they should also look at things at more granular level. So what you can see clearly here, that there are commodities which have actually grown quite fast compared to what it was in August last year. So rice, iron ore, oil seeds, everything has done fantastically well, and including carpets, which India exports a lot. That has grown 16% year on year in the month of August. But when it comes to other commodities like gems and jewelry or leather products, they have been laggard so far. So the message here is clearly that it is not just the business you are currently operating in, but also where the growth areas are. And if you see opportunities in new areas, these kind of numbers can help you identify those. Now, let me quickly go through the top questions which business leaders and CEOs are looking at in this crisis. So on one side, in last 6 months, when we have been discussing with leaders, they are always in search of a better strategic context because of all this uncertainty around in the environment. And then the second question is that there are a number of things they can do, but what should they do now? What should they do in next 6 months? And how should they steer their company when we enter into a world where COVID is no more there? Because some of the things would have fundamentally changed once we come out of this crisis. So at Kanvic Consulting, we have created a 5-part framework which companies can use to address those questions. First thing here is that to make sense of changing economic and financial environment, companies should create a peripheral vision. A peripheral vision is something which is beyond the normal site of operations and normal site of thinking. And I will come to that in the next slide, that what it entails to build a peripheral vision. That peripheral vision helps you develop adaptive strategies because the situation is dynamic. For example, we can clearly see that Europe flattened the COVID curve, but in last 1 month, the cases have started increasing again, and there is a second wave. So as the situation on the ground changes, the company's strategies are also adapted to sync in those realities. The third thing is on timing your strategies. We have 3 horizon framework. So you should do something which is required today, but something which might come up, for example, in the remaining of this financial year, and then the longer term actions which will take your business forward in the times to come. The remaining 2 things are more organizational and review and monitoring of your strategy. So first is the typical functional teams of a business are not fully suitable to deal with this crisis because it requires some of the skill sets which might not be available in the functional teams and the way companies are set up. And the second thing is, when companies are monitoring it through their typical MIS system, that might be out of sync of today's realities. And what we have created to deal with that is something called visual wall. So you gather information about your business performance and your strategies on an ongoing basis, and that helps you adapt on the next round of iteration. Now I will take a few more minutes to talk about peripheral vision. This peripheral vision is coming from the new 5 forces. So in business strategy, Michael Porter's 5 forces has been a gold standard for last 40 years. But that helps you understand an industry's dynamic. What we have brought here in the new 5 forces is something which helps you understand the external market realities in the COVID world and helps you create this peripheral vision and build your strategies. So on one axis, you have the health side where you track how COVID is progressing, and second, what kind of containment measures are there, either in terms of the medications available today or the vaccines, which are all under different stages of development. While on the other axis, you can see that on one side you have how governments are responding across the world to this crisis, and on the other side, what actions businesses are taking, for example, to grow your business and take advantage in this situation through mergers and acquisitions, and what all it means to public sentiment. And this particularly might be more relevant to India because India's economy is more consumer driven, consumption driven, and public sentiment has been at the core of GDP's challenges even before COVID and now. So if companies monitor these 5 forces across the indicators which you can see on the right side of this slide, then they have a very, very powerful framework to build their strategies in this changing world. If I go to the next slide, this is what helps you time your actions. So there are few things which, you know, on a weekly basis or monthly basis, you need to still do until the clouds become clear. But when you are doing that, there is a continuous adaptation in these strategies. So for example, when we look at the export figures, what I presented, this might not remain same 3 months down the line or 6 months down the line. So when you are tracking it, perhaps other than carpet, some more categories start growing, and you might have interest there, which is not allowing you to take action now, but can help you take action in 3 months time or 6 months time. So this is how you can adapt. And then for the longer term, one force which is clearly impacting all businesses is digital. So how you digitalize your business, we can clearly see we are operating through this webinar and talking to each other, but the implication of digital goes beyond this, and it affects all part of your business. So by acting now, adapting your business in the short term, and then taking a new road for the long term, you can time your actions on 3 horizons. Finally, I think I have got one more slide on the COVID-19 team. So as I suggested, the typical functional teams might not have all the traits required to deal with COVID-19 situation. And therefore, you should strive to get people, for example, who can frame issues as questions. When something is not clear, rather than bringing an immediate action or answer to that, those issues are framed as questions. Or, you know, some of the actions are treated as experiments where you say in advance that we know that we might fail, but through this action, we will come to know whether this is something which is going to work or not work. So these type of traits typically might not be there in a steady state world, and the teams might not be configured accordingly, but the COVID situation requires the teams to be more adaptive, framing issues as questions, and treating some of the actions as experiments. So with this, I will end my presentation, and I will just pass on for a couple of slides to Gihan, where he can talk about one case study on internationalization for one leading Indian company. And then we'll pass on it to Vishal.
Thank you, Deepak. And as Deepak mentioned there, we've been working with Indian companies who have been using internationalization as a route to identify and tap into new growth opportunities, whilst the COVID crisis continues and many companies are facing subdued growth in different sectors within India. We worked with one of the leading manufacturers in the building materials space in India, with clients in the Middle East, as well as in Europe, North America, and different parts of Asia. At the outset of the crisis, going into March, they faced two major challenges. On the one hand, as many of you, I think, on this webinar will have experienced, big constraints on the supply chain, both from sourcing and manufacturing in India as lockdown was implemented, whilst on the other hand, really a short-term collapse in demand in regions like Europe and North America, similarly as lockdowns were implemented there. Amid all that uncertainty, the client approached us at Kanvic Consulting to see how it could better navigate through this crisis. And what we did was essentially identify different options for the business and evaluate them on two important axes. First of all, on the one hand, on the impact of COVID on that particular demand driver. And then secondly, on evaluating their ability to serve that market or that market opportunity during the crisis. So when we were looking at different opportunities and first of all, looking at impact of COVID on those sectors, we looked at some of those factors that Deepak covered earlier, such as how government regulations in that jurisdiction might affect consumer demand for the product. We went granularly to understand how major clients and customers in different regions of the world were scheduling or planning their reopening of their business. We understood the financial strength of those businesses, so that likelihood and ability to pay, and the end consumer sentiment or the public sentiment that Deepak discussed in each of those geographies. On the other angle, we looked at how able that client was to access different markets during the current crisis, assess the level of supply chain disruption to serve those different geographies, the availability of inventory, and the availability of people and resources to be able to quickly reallocate it to that. During this process, this enabled us to prioritize different opportunities globally for their export-driven business and identify high-growth segments that actually saw them double profits and revenues over this 6 months compared to the previous 6 months. So I think what this shows is there's opportunities out there in this market. International markets in particular can provide a great growth opportunity for Indian companies. And a platform like RAK ICC can be a great vehicle for you as Indian companies to drive and accelerate that internationalization process in a seamless and a highly compliant manner. So I'll conclude there and hand over back to Vishal and Dr. Ansari. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Vishal and Dr. Ansari.
Thank you, Gehan. Thank you, Deepak, for the insightful detail about the current strategy which corporate should adopt.